Check one, two, three. Hey everybody, it's Michael Helms, also known as Michael the Sound Guy, and this is the Location Sound Podcast. You know, each episode we talk with location sound mixers, boom ops, and other industry pros about the various aspects of recording sound on location, whether it's for feature and independent films, TV commercials, interviews, any time where dialogue from actors is recorded. I started my career in the recording studios in New York City with some of the big artists back in the day, and later on projects for networks like HBO, Sci-Fi Channel, and the Cartoon Network. As time went by, I got out of the studio and began working in production sound. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or just starting out, thanks for joining us. Okay, our guest today is a production sound mixer and sound designer based out of Los Angeles, California. Please welcome Pamela Xing-Berman.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Glad you could be here. Now, we've been talking with most of our guests lately about where they were when COVID-19 first happened in the February, March time. So kind of tell us your experience.
Yeah, I was here in LA. I had actually just moved to Los Angeles from Washington, D.C. 6 months before COVID hit. So right when that ball was really starting to get rolling and I was starting to, get regular clients and, get more immersed in the scene and in the community here. Just got that first production postponement letter. And then it was like 5 more. And then everything just was like screeching halt.
So what did you do with your time while you were hanging out?
I wish I can say that I was one of those people who initially was just on it and got creative, but I was a denial person. I really thought that it was only going to last for like a few weeks, maybe a month. And so I did a lot of nothing in the beginning except for maybe have a couple pity parties and just kind of was trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do? I had done some post-production. I went to school for audio tech, which is a very interesting route to take. And so I was like, well, let me start figuring out how I can get more work, doing that. Because none of us knew, right? We were just wondering if productions when they were going to start back up and how it was going to go. So I have to say I didn't have a very productive few months after we got the COVID pandemic laid on us, I guess.
I had moments of clarity, but then I also, was kind of bummed a little bit myself.
Yeah, I think for me, because I was so new, and I came out here with a goal. I had been working in Washington, D.C. for a few years professionally, and I felt ready to come to Los Angeles. And I really hit the ground running when I got here. I knew that this is a business, even in a city as big as Los Angeles, where it really is about making connections with other people and getting yourself familiar with the sound community, right? So I was really hustling, and I think because of that and because of just my focus just strictly in this area, I was a little stunned, I wasn't as fast to pivot as some other people that I know that were, that we've all seen the really annoying infomercials that played a million times, which I could live with never seeing another one of them again. But yeah.
That was the only content they had.
I know. Yeah, just all like the celebrities and NFL and professional sports people saying that we're all in this together. And I'm like, you live in a compound with everything, it's not the same for everybody. Let's be honest.
That is true. Yeah. And my family, I think I've mentioned on the podcast before, but it's like we made it all the way through until August and then we all got COVID.
Oh, wow. I'm glad that you guys all made it, out of the other side, because I think it's one of those things, like a lot of things, where it doesn't seem real until it happens to you or somebody close to you, and I had friends who didn't get it, but their parents got it. And that's obviously scarier for anybody because the older populations are just so much more susceptible to worse outcomes, right? So, it changes your perspective on things if you can pull from that personal experience.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your audio kit. So when you're working on set, kind of tell us about your mixer and mics and all the other things in your bag.
So the things that I actually own, pretty much I use the 633 Sound Devices mixer and recorder. That is just a little workhorse. It's so small, it's so reliable. Honestly, I chose that because that's what I trained on. And I think it's a great deal for the price. They obviously have come out with a totally new line and it looks fancy and has some fantastic features. But I stand by the 633. I think it's a great little workhorse to have. And I've taken it in the desert, I've taken it in all kinds of crazy climates, and it's always pulled through for me. My go to is the Sennheiser 416. I think that's also, again, I kind of, I feel like this. I would still consider myself relatively new in this business, even though now I've been doing this for about 4 years. And all of this stuff is very pricey. So you do really want to be careful when you're choosing what you're buying for your kit. And so for me, I always focus on things that are versatile and things that are hardy, because you get in production sound, you get put into a lot of very interesting environments. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's calm and you're in a clean, nice place, and a lot of times you're not. So the 416 is just kind of one of those mics, again, that you could do a lot of things to it, and I think it's still going to pull through for you. And then for my wireless kit, I have two sets. I have the G4s from Sennheiser, which is what I started with, and I wire those with Sankins. And I also have the Electrosonics SMD with the dual receiver, which are obviously just a huge step up, even though it's a little bit of their older line. They also have great new things, but again, pricing. And then for my IFB, I do Comtex, and that's because I got an amazing deal on some used Comtex from True Audio, which is a audio house out here. And I always recommend to people starting out and building their kit to look for those deals, look for equipment that's used. And I think it's definitely okay to buy from some of those. There are a lot of Facebook groups that are kind of equipment swaps, but I would say be wary because there's nobody checking them out. And when you do go through the audio houses, they're checked out. And so you can probably be guaranteed that they're in really good condition. Let's see, I recently bought the latest tentacles for my sync boxes. Those are great. They're incredibly light. They're incredibly small. And something that I find is that camera people love them. And that's really important when talking about sync boxes. And obviously the Denicky, the Smart Slate, super helpful again for time code. And my boom pole. My boom pole was really important that I got something light. So I have the QXS, and that one is just incredibly light and just extends your arm's life so much. I think that's it, right?
What kind of batteries do you use?
So for a long time, I used just the L mount batteries, and they're great too. But the NPs, oh my gosh, they will last you probably a whole day. I mean, you might have to change them out one. It just prevents you from having to really worry about battery life. And again, I got them used, and I got 3 of them with a charger, and they've been working for me for 4 years. It's a great basic kit. I don't think there are some times when I will need things that extend outside of what I personally own. Of course, you can go to the rental houses. We have some fantastic ones out here. They've just saved me so many times. And I also recommend making friends. Making friends who are willing to lend you their gear in a pinch, because and who you can lend your gear to in a pinch as well. And that will help you out a lot. I find that sound community are pretty supportive of each other. And when you make friends, if they can help, they're always down to help.
Well, let's talk about some of the projects you've worked on. We've had an election recently, and you were working on a project called She Votes. So, kind of tell us about that.
One of my sort of pivot projects, She Votes is an organization. It's nonpartisan, and really the main purpose of the organization is to get people to exercise their right to vote, and I felt like that was very important. And so I was brought on board to help create some digital content. It was not just about mixing sound. It was about producing a couple interview series, producing a couple of videos, editing the videos for them. And I just think we came up with some really great stuff. We had some really great guests that the founder of She Votes did interviews with. And we put out a call right before the election for people to send in self videos of why they were voting and where they were voting from. And they were so beautiful to go through and listen to. The editing was really challenging because I wanted to make sure to really give everybody a chance to say what they wanted to say because people were so passionate about it. But of course, for any social media, you have to keep videos short because people don't have attention spans anymore. So it's quite a challenging editing job, but it was really rewarding to hear people so passionate about using their voice and about other people using their voice.
Those are the kind of projects that make it really special with what all we do here.
Yeah, because I think especially now during the pandemic, content has now for years, even before social media, obviously through film and television and radio, it's always mattered and it's always given a platform. But I think now more than ever, with the numerous platforms that we have and with the direction that I think content producers are going, where we want to be more representative and people want to get the perspectives from lots of different types of people, then what we're really doing is creating material that people can relate to and see themselves in, and that can hopefully be encouraging in trying times like now, that can maybe spark some inspiration or make people not feel so alone, or make people see more seen and more part of our society. So it brought the purpose back into content creation for me in a totally different way, not to get too hippy dippy. Kumbaya.
That's awesome. No, that's great. It's great to have passion projects like that. So now you also started something years ago. It's called Women in Audio. What is that about?
Well, so I can't take full credit for that. I co-founded a chapter for the graduate school that I went to, American University. And Shannon Lynch, she was the founder of it. And, at the time that I was accepted into my program, which is the master's degree audio technology program at American University in Washington, D.C., I think I was one of 3 women in the program. It was very male dominated, just like this field. And the head of our department was a woman. And we did start to see more diversity in the program, which was really exciting. And we wanted to create a space to encourage women to get into audio and feel comfortable getting into audio and not feel intimidated because it is such a, technical career. And so we created this chapter, which there's a larger chapter, I think, based out of San Francisco, Women in Audio. And we got sponsored to go to South by Southwest and, represent women in audio and get to experience South by Southwest, which was very, very cool and overwhelming. Yeah, it's kind of just taken off. Like every new generation of women that come into the university sort of continue this chapter and continue to have meetings and offer support through solidarity of, for other girls and women and even go sometimes into schools and show younger women what it's all about.
Okay. Speaking of education, you started off as a singer and a composer.
Right.
So how did that take you into production where you are now?
Oh man, I have the most wayward, not straight trajectory of anybody I know. I originally went to school as a jazz vocal major at Howard University with a double major in psychology, which obviously does nothing unless you go to graduate school or medical school. And after I graduated undergrad, I moved to New York and I was singing full time and performing full time, which also meant for money, I was bartending. So it was a very, very, it was a grind. You're in New York, you're, working till 4 a.m. and then you're literally going straight to the audition line and waiting for hours to be seen and stuff like that. So that was a grind that was tiring, and after a while I was like, I need to find something to make money for myself that's a little bit more sustainable and maybe a little bit more reliable. And I reflected back on an experience while I was living in Hawaii finishing undergrad. I got a very cool opportunity to sing for Dr. Dre. He came to Hawaii to record an album and not deal with the craziness that I think as a celebrity you deal with in LA, especially during this time when it was like the height of paparazzi. And my roommate was sort of their tour guide. And she introduced me to a producer named Mark Batson, who just happened to have a professor in common with me from Howard University. So he calls us at 7:00 in the morning after we had taken them out to all these bars in Waikiki. And he's like, Dr. Dre wants to hear you sing. Now, I don't know if you know anything about singing, but normally as a classically trained singer, those were not the conditions that I wanted to have to perform for somebody as talented and amazing as Dr. Dre. So we go to they were working at a studio, I think it was in Hawaii Kai, and he's like, let me hear you sing. And he asked me to sing the hook to Tina Turner, Private Dancer, which I knew the hook, but it's not a song that I know well. So I just wing it. And he's like, let's go up to the actual studio. And I'm working with him and he's directing me and coaching me while I'm singing. And he had this focus that I've never seen before, and I've been singing really my whole life and been in choirs and done, quite a bit with singing. And I was really impressed by it. And then he would get so obsessed and he was just like fastidious. And some of his people told us that he would listen to one part for 10 hours, like just over and over, and that he was obsessive about it. And so fast forward to years down the road where I decide that, I need to branch out from just, my dream of being a performer and a singer. And I was very touched by meeting him and I was very impressed with his knowledge and his ability to use his musical talent in this other way. So I was like, well, I'm classically trained. I'm very musical. I've been singing all my life. I play piano. I'm going to go and be a music producer, which I think a lot of people have this epiphany, right? So I already had my bachelor's at this point, and I knew that I didn't want another bachelor's degree. I went to some programs to check out. I went to Full Sail, looked at their program, and Full Sail is great, but Full Sail is like Disneyland. Like there was something about it that for me personally, I didn't think it was a good fit. I mean, obviously fantastic people have come out of Full Sail and they know what they're doing, but it just did not match me. And so I was like, I don't know if I want to pay all this money and go back to school. And I was at an event and met a woman who had just graduated a master's program in audio technology at American University, which was just happened to be in Washington, D.C., which is where I was living at the time. So I randomly called up. I spoke to the head of the department. She was like, we need your application and all your samples by like in a week. And I was like, okay. And I don't know how, but I got it done. And I sent them, some samples of some stuff I had barely helped produce, to be honest. Like, my ex was like a DJ and a music producer, and we had done some songs. So I had some influence, but honestly, it was not really me. And I sent that, and I sent some other work samples, and they were like, "You're a very unusual applicant. We'd like you to come in for an interview." And I came in for an interview, and then I was accepted into the program. And that kind of started my road. And here I thought that I was going to be a music producer. And through the course of the program, I figured out that that was not for me in two ways. I think that my honest opinion is this: to be a successful music producer, you have to be cream of the crop. You have to be insanely talented. You also have to be really happy working very, very, very long hours by yourself in a studio, in a dark studio cave, right? And you also have to be okay producing music that doesn't resonate with you. And all of those things were not for me. And because at this time in my life, I had lived a little life and I had worked a couple different careers, I wanted something that I knew would directly lead to work. I didn't want, to go to school again and not end up working in the field that I went to school for. So my mentor, who was the head of the department, she had a background in location sound and in sound design, and she suggested to me that I try it out. And so she started to train me on an independent study. And then I started to go out and do student films and work with the film program, which is, American has one of the best film programs in the country, especially for doc. And I started to go out and work, and I was really good at it. And it fit the social aspect of working on a crew really fit with me, and being able to think quickly and troubleshoot really fit with me. So I just made the switch. I was like, I think that this is just a better fit. And so I started to focus my attention on, location sound and on sound design. That's an extremely long story.
It's quite the journey. It's nice to hear everybody's story because, I started off, I was working in New York City in recording studios. And I worked at one studio called Soundtrack Studios, and it was primarily a hip hop studio, and it was fun. It was where, I started there, but although it was fun and I enjoyed it, it still was not really my passion. I moved to another studio, and we primarily did commercials and promos and things like that for a lot of cable networks, a Sci-Fi Channel, and HBO and all that kind of stuff. So it was a different world, but still doing the audio. But then after a while too, it's like you kind of want to, it's like this is fun, but I want to grow. I want to do more. And I had a background in video. And so it was easy for me to transition into doing sound on, for commercials and getting out there on set and on location. So that was kind of my experience. But I can agree with what you're saying because it's fun, but it's not quite, like you said, it doesn't quite resonate with you 100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were also working on a project now called Skin Deep.
That's upcoming for me, yeah.
Can you talk much about it, or is it kind of hush-hush?
I don't think so. It's I'm going to be working on their docu-series. One of the producers reached out to me. They're a really, really interesting studio and company, and they have tons of stuff online that you should definitely check out on YouTube and Instagram. And this is an ongoing docu-series that they've been working on. And I think now they're also developing a podcast to go along. So they're great. I'm very excited to work with them. They focus a lot on, I think, capturing diverse voices and really interesting stories, which is just so cool. And for them, I'm just going to be sort of doing what I do and being a, production sound mixer. And I think they don't actually usually hire audio people, and they're branching out because they're starting a podcast and they need a better quality audio. And I think for them, audio is so important because their content really is emotional, and your job is really to capture that emotion that the people are, emitting when they're doing the interviews. So I'm super psyched to have been brought on. They're really cool, and I love working on interesting stuff.
Yeah, especially like you said, capturing that underlying experience and the passion and that kind of thing, which brings up another, what are your feelings on technique versus gear?
I think that if you can get amazing gear, good for you, go out and get it because it can give you some advantages. But I also feel that in this business, we focus almost entirely on gear. And I think that without the technique, even great gear isn't going to get it done. There's a lot of good gear that's not going to send you into debt. And I'm sure there are people who disagree with me on this, but I think that you can, I started out with the NTG2 and I got some great audio on that. And that is a very affordable microphone. The only way to learn in this business is to be in these situations, to be in a situation where you have crazy interfering noise, where you have very strange spaces that you have to work on, and getting yourself in the best position to capture that dialogue, and to really understand how the voice works and how projection works and how differences in people's voices affect how you're capturing it, just how people speak, how they enunciate.
Yeah. I even talk about, a lot of male voices, it's a very chesty and deep. And I was talking to somebody the other day and they were like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. But they had never really thought about that. So yeah, some people have, it's a very throaty and a very mouthy sound, but then other ones, it's like it's resonating from their chest cavity,
Oh, definitely with men. And where that comes into play is when you're miking a male actor, depending on the tone of their voice. Sometimes if you put that too close to the center of their chest, it sounds very muddled, like it's too much. It doesn't sound sharp enough because you're just getting this resonance of the chest cavity. And so understanding that or being aware of that and realizing that you cannot wire everybody in the same way, that's incredibly important, and sometimes you move it and you move it and you move the lav and you just got to do the best you can. I was talking to another sound mixer recently and I was like, for me, the biggest challenges are leather coats. Cannot stand them. I mean, it is just the worst when you have to deal with a wardrobe that has leather coats, right? And, also like women's hair, brushing over the mic, all kinds of little things you have to think about when placing the mic. And sometimes you're like in the middle of a production, you're like, man, I just want to keep tweaking that mic. And that's the balance you have to be aware of, is doing your job, getting the best audio you can get, but not completely disturbing production or completely alienating the director or the producer that you work with so that they just hate you and never want to work with you again.
Well, that brings up a good point too. So how do you like to create a comfortable environment for the talent?
I'm just myself. I think that be conversational and be respectful. And again, that's sort of a case by case situation, because depending on what kind of, is it a film, is it narrative, or is it documentary, is it a branding video, those all affect the mood of just the overall production, right? So some talent, if it's a narrative scene and it's going to be really intense, they really need to be in their head. And that means you not being chatty Cathy, okay? That means you just doing your job as quickly and as quietly as possible. And then, in other situations where you can tell people are nervous, because you're getting up close and personal with people, it's about, just being sort of conversational and putting them at ease. I've had really good luck with that. And I think that's just kind of reading the room and reading the person, and treat everybody sort of with that same respect, with that same no matter who they are. Because, yeah, sometimes you work with talent and you knew of them before you worked with them, right? So that can make people feel a certain way. But I think if you just go in and you're like, they're here doing a job, I'm here doing a job, and then it keeps you on this same platform and you don't maybe feel intimidated, which I think can happen when you're sort of new and in the game.
Yeah, and some people they have a natural ability to kind of read the room, and some people do not know how to read the room. It's like he's walking away. You should probably stop talking now. you know.
And, I don't know if that's teachable is the thing. With sound people, with audio people, you get a whole spectrum, right? So I guess as much as possible, trying to read the situation. But yeah, if you don't have that ability, I don't know if I have any advice. I guess probably my advice is less is more usually,
Oh, that's good. Well, how do you build relationships with producers and DPs?
Well, the first thing is always be on time and always be receptive. I think that's really important. Sets are stressful. And I think, especially early on in my career, you would find a lot of people that equated sort of high tension with being a hard worker. And to me, that just makes you look inefficient and like you don't know how to do your job. I actually always had the opposite approach where I was like, my job is to troubleshoot with a poker face. There is a guarantee that something will always not go 100% the way that you planned. That is the nature of the game, right? But what production taught me was to just like really keep your cool in that way and to always remain flexible, be likable, and be willing to understand that the other people who are doing their job are also stressed out. So how can you help? I say that, but I want to add a caveat that I do think it's important to always be firm. That's another balance. Like, you have a job to do, and sometimes when you're new, you will feel very pressured by the producer, and don't. In the end, they're going to be happy if you are speaking up for your department and saying, hey, actually, this wasn't working and we need to do it again, or that, you have to be honest. And I think that's important to say, because I think it can be really intimidating for people who are just starting out. As far as with DPs or camera folks, I mean, they are your best friend, like these are the people, like, make friends with your AD, make friends with your AC. If they like working with you, when they get that next job and they get asked, hey, do you know an audio person? They're going to bring you on. And that is honestly how I've gotten a huge amount of my work, is just from, working with DPs who liked working with me, who liked chatting with me during lunchtime, super important, because you're on set for 12 hours most days. People want to work with people they like.
Yes. How can sound mixers kind of join together to make sure our rights on set are being honored?
I think a couple ways. I want to say that I find overall the sound community very embracing. Being that I'm a woman in a male-dominated field, I've felt really supported by a lot of the guys in the sound mixer community. But I think where some of the challenges come are in sort of when not the outside of the sound mixer community. I think it's important that we are all very open and honest about pay. And I say this because when I was starting out, I was really lucky. I had a mentor who had worked as a sound mixer for 7 years, I think, at the time that I met her. And she just laid it out for me. But I think what you get is that I do think that women are sometimes lowered or asked to compromise on their pay. And I don't know if it happens to the guys. Maybe it does.
Yeah.
But I do know that it happens. It doesn't. I'm like, if you went to your doctor, would you say, hey, actually, I know that's your fee, but would you accept this? We're the one field where people feel totally comfortable doing that. And I think that maintaining that what we do is a craft. It might look easy, but it's not. It's a huge investment on our part. Even when you have just sort of a basic kit like I do, it's a huge investment. And you should get compensated fairly for what you do. And I think that if we as sound mixers are open and support each other and kind of put a cap on what we will accept and what we won't accept, so that we encourage productions to pay their sound mixers what they're worth. And when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I need audio and I know you won't do it for this price, but do you know anybody that will do it for this price? Say, no, I don't, because that's not a fair price to pay people. So I think that's one area. I think another area is credit. I was trying to find it before we jumped on the call, but there's been a petition, I believe, and I don't know I think it might just be LA sound mixers, but for, the higher ends of the sound department to be credited, because a lot of times sound mixers are not even credited, and we have a very important job to do. I know we kind of stay near our carts, or we have our little sections, but what we're doing, if you do not have good audio, you cannot make a good production. And that is just facts. That is just how it is. So just the lack of acknowledgement, we all need to stand up and say, what we do is hard, and it should be credited, and it should be acknowledged on credits and by what you're compensating us.
Yeah. I had a situation where I have a friend that has a production company, and he hired me to do audio, and it was for this, I think it was a Nat Geo project. And the final came out, and I'm watching it, and I'm watching the credits, and they just credited his production company.
Yep.
And I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So, it does happen. And then, of course, I think they IMDb'd me and uncredited, but still, it was kind of like, come on, guys, this is our advertisement. This is what we do. These are our credits, that help us in our, in our job, in our next job, in our, our career. So.
Yeah, it's what gives us, it's basically our references, right? And this is not a traditional job. Like having a resume, yes, everybody should have it, because there are some corporate jobs that they'll look at it, but really they're not going to, right? Like they are going to be like, hey, let me check out your IMDb or like your credits, or like, what have you done? And that is all people care about. That's word of mouth and your credits. And so when we're not credited, it really does hurt us and hurt all of the work that we're doing to try to make sure you have something that, is great.
No, it's true. And the same thing I found when I was in New York in the recording studios. Sometimes you would get credited, sometimes you didn't. I worked with Moby one time, I think for 2 weeks, and the album came out, no credit. I think I was the assistant engineer at the time. And, or you work on you work on a whole album for somebody, and then your credits are either they're mixed up, they're not the right songs you worked on, or they're not there at all, or, it is a weird thing. And sometimes you have to ask, hey, oh yeah, write it down, and I'll, you're giving the producer your information, because they're not asking for it. So it is, I think I don't know if it's just an entertainment industry thing, but some people are better at it. Some producers are better at it than others.
Yeah, of course. And I think that is an entertainment industry thing, where we have so many different situational things, and that can be about who you work with. But I think if we could standardize some of them, that could be really great. People who work in the entertainment industry were hit super hard by COVID. And a lot of us don't have any protections in place. If you don't make your union hours, if you're in the union, for example, you lose your health insurance, right? So when I say band together, I guess that's what I mean. I think that, our jobs are laborious. They are hard work, and sound mixers do, our job is as hard as everybody else's, and I just think that, like, you never see camera people not getting credited. Just saying, right?
Yeah. Have you seen that one meme? And it's like, camera just has to get it right one time. We have to get it right every time.
Right. It's so true. Yeah, it's like funny, but not,
Yeah. Well, you've done, as a production sound mixer, you're on set, but you've also done sound design and dialogue editing. So how has that kind of influenced your philosophy when you're recording sound on set?
I mean, I think it lets you know, first off, like, what's gonna, like, I tell people, I'm like, look, The fix it and post thing, like, that's like not really true, actually, because like if you capture it in production, it's gonna be there. Like my elephant neighbors walking above me. Like there's no getting rid of it. It helped me to understand obviously how to do my job better as a production mixer, but also the other way around too. Like there is an influence where working as a production sound mixer, I understand how to pick out the best parts of audio when I'm doing dialogue editing or something like that.
From the dialogue editing, what are things that you see like you're constantly having to fix or problems that you have to deal with?
Make sure that just clarity, some of the stuff it's always going to be stuff you're trying to fix, distance of just really understanding how that person's voice is working, right? And adjusting your boom or adjusting your lav for that particular person to get the best tone that you can possibly get. Does that person have a lot of mouth sounds and stuff it's just that kind of stuff.
Out of all the projects you've worked on so far, what's been your favorite?
I don't know. They're all so different. And in this business, I feel like they all just like cycle through. She Votes, obviously it is incredible to work on and continuing to work with them. And also I feel like I'm just getting an opportunity to flesh out my skill set so much. And some of my, newer kind of clients, I'm working with an artist activist named Whit Hazen, and she is absolutely amazing and inspiring, just has inspired me so much. But every single project that I do, I take personally. I like to think of it like that. So in that moment, I am dedicated fully to, whatever I'm working on. And I try to capture what they're going for the best that I can.
I kind of look at it in some ways the same, unless there was some just traumatic thing that you're having to deal with on set. But sometimes I almost look at it at the end. Did I do a good job? Did I do my best? Could I have recorded that better? Those kind of things versus sometimes you don't have any control over the content. You didn't write the script. So sometimes, that's a terrible script or that's a terrible line, but that's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to record it as best we can.
Right.
Now, do you have a nightmare project? Something that just was like, oh my gosh.
I did. I don't know if this was very early on in my career. And hold on, let me pick up my dog because I think he'll stop barking. Sorry. So very early on in my career, I was brought onto a short film, which is a way that a lot of sound mixers get their start. And at the time I was living actually in Washington, D.C., and it was a LA production. And I just really, I was the head of sound, and I had a boom op, and I had a utilities, a guy who was actually from my grad school, young guy. And one of the directors, and she was called, it was a title that I've never even heard used in production. I'm hoping I can remember it. Hold on. What did she call herself? It wasn't creative director. Anyways, she was a kind of director. It had a title that does not exist in the real production world. And she said that her job was to inspire the director to see their vision. Well, she kept borrowing our utilities person to be in the scene. And he was young. He was 20 years old, And this was one of those cases that you spoke about where you were not a fan of the content being created, but that is not our job, right? And normally I would just do my job and that would not, affect me. But because she kept asking our utilities person to stand in and sort of act as like an extra, it was starting to, affect. And also he was really uncomfortable, but I think because he was young, he felt awkward speaking up for himself. The reason she was asking him to stand in was totally inappropriate. I guess I'll put it that way. So after he expressed to me that he was uncomfortable with it, I approached her and I said, listen, actually, first of all, you should talk to me first. about using our utilities person to stand in. This is also obviously not union and not a big gig, because this would never happen on a big production. But as I said, it was early in my career. And then I was like, also, what you're asking is just really inappropriate and slightly offensive. And so we just really butt heads, and we didn't get into it, but I actually did end up asking to not be credited in this project because I disliked it so much. We finished the job because I think that's very important. I think it's important to show up on time and do what you're supposed to do. But me and my boom op both asked to not be credited in the production. Is that too vague? I don't want to get into it because it's so bad.
No, I appreciate you sharing that because, I'm sure some people can relate.
Yeah, it was strange. Never happened to me again, thank God. So
that's interesting. Well, what would you tell women to expect if they're deciding they want to get into the film industry and primarily into sound or something? What kind of recommendations or encouragement or advice would you give them?
I would say, don't be intimidated. And also, it is like everything, I think most fields, unfortunately, that women do have to prove ourselves more. I think that you should expect that people will automatically think that you might not know as much as the guy. And they might also think that you can't do as much because of our stature, right? And I always say this, I'm like, yes, I cannot do what a 6'7" boom op can do. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I can, because I simply can't. But he can't do some stuff that I can do. Like one of my fellow female sound mixers was telling me about when she had to perch on the edge of a boat while mixing. And me, I've had to be in the smallest corner behind the DP, crouching and booming. And there are things that there's an advantage to, being smaller. So I would say, expect that, but don't let it deter you. And if you love it, go out and do it and rely on the sound community, because I do think that the sound community, at least in my experience, is very embracing. All the guys that are my friends in this community are super supportive of me. They always let me know what they're getting paid so that I know whether I'm getting paid or offered equal pay. They are always willing to offer advice. They're always willing to offer encouragement if I, especially in the beginning when I was feeling sort of insecure, and we all have that self-saboteur we're dealing with. And I would say, don't be afraid of it. Go for it. We are becoming a more diverse community for sure. I will say that. And reach out to your other sound mixer sisters. There's a group, LA Sound Sisters. Carrie Sheldon, she's been out here for years, and she was so welcoming to me. They added me to the Facebook group. We keep an open line of communication. And I think that's really important, that community, The future of sound mixing, I think we don't know where it's going, right? Because productions are starting back up again, but there's a lot of differences now. And so I think be open to change, but also if we all stand together, especially now when they're wanting sound departments to be smaller and smaller, if we all work with what productions want, but also keep in mind what our needs as sound mixers are, I think hopefully we can endure this crazy period that we're all living through.
That is true. Well, Pamela, as we close things up here, if people wanted to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, you can definitely find me on Instagram. It's Pamela_sound. Also, my email address is just PamelaXingSound@gmail.com.
All right. Well, I want to say thanks to Pamela Xing-Berman for being on the show today.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say thanks to everyone for listening. If you have questions or would like us to discuss a particular topic, email us at locationsoundpodcast@gmail.com. Please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. We're available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, remember, sound is half the picture.